Racist cop pulls gun on Black Army general, instantly regrets it. Night draped the silent streets of Fort Bragg, its flickering streetlights catching the gleam of an imposing SUV prowling toward the base exit. General Marcus Bryant, one of the highest-ranking African Americans in the U.S. Army, adjusted his uniform jacket, mind set on a late-night supply check. He had endured countless tours overseas, forging a reputation of valor and decorum. What he didn't expect was that on this tranquil drive, prejudice would rear its ugly head in the shape of a restless cop's flashing lights. A fateful confrontation lay just beyond the windshield, one that would test courage, reveal hidden truths, and forever change two men's lives. General Marcus Bryant was as formidable as the base he presided over. At 49, he was built like a champion linebacker, tall, broad-shouldered, and meticulously groomed. His authoritative presence could silence an entire room of recruits, yet behind that commanding exterior lay a patient mentor, keen on shaping younger soldiers into leaders. From the vantage point of his corner office at Fort Bragg, the largest military installation in North Carolina, Marcus looked out at the labyrinth of barracks, training grounds, and supply depots. That evening, an urgent request about a missing shipment of supplies had drawn him back on base after hours. Despite the lateness, Marcus never complained. He believed any logistical hiccup that threatened the well-being of soldiers overseas deserved his immediate attention. Plus, it gave him a reason to roam the quiet corridors of the base, his second home. Since the day he was commissioned a young officer, his reputation preceded him, not just a highly decorated soldier, but an unwavering advocate for his troops' morale and well-being. He'd spearheaded improvements in living quarters, championed mental health initiatives, and earned the unwavering loyalty of many under his command. Yet, outside Fort Bragg's guarded gates, General Bryant was just another middle-aged black man navigating a society that didn't always see rank or respect it. Tonight, after settling the supply confusion, Marcus decided to head off base. He had a small cabin outside Fayetteville, a peaceful retreat where he could decompress. The journey through the winding roads that skirted pine forests typically calmed his nerves. He relished the hush of the rural night, broken only by the chirp of crickets or an occasional lone car. His black SUV, an unpretentious Chevrolet Tahoe, rumbled over the pavement as he gave a final salute to the guard at the checkpoint. The young soldier recognized him instantly, snapping to attention. Marcus returned the courtesy with a nod, then eased out onto the dimly lit highway. Little did he know, just a few miles ahead, a storm was about to break, one fueled by ignorance, arrogance, and a loaded weapon. And as he would soon learn, not even the stripes of a general's uniform could always shield him from the worst of humanity. The road leading away from Fort Bragg was mostly deserted this time of night. Flanked by tall pines on either side, it curved gently, the asphalt illuminated by periodic streetlights that cast long, dancing shadows across the Tahoe's hood. General Bryant drove at a comfortable pace, no hurry, no sense of alarm. He had music low on the radio, an old R&B tune from his younger days that momentarily took him back to simpler times. As he rounded a bend, a set of headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. They drew closer at a rapid pace, out of sync with the usual unhurried local traffic. Marcus kept his eyes flicking between the mirror and the road. Before long, the headlights settled unnervingly close to his bumper. He couldn't discern if it was a civilian vehicle or law enforcement, because the silhouette showed only the glare of brights burning into his rear window. His instincts told him something was off. He'd been taught to read a situation from myriad angles, be it a foreign battlefield or a domestic highway. This car was tailing him on a deserted stretch. Why? Then, without warning, the telltale flash of red and blue lights erupted. A siren blared briefly. Marcus lifted an eyebrow. He checked his speedometer. He was under the limit. He was sober, and there was no obvious reason for a stop. Nevertheless, as a law-abiding citizen and a man aware that refusing compliance could escalate, he flipped on his turn signal, found a safe shoulder, and eased to a halt. The sweeping pine trees now formed a silent audience to what would happen next. He placed the Tahoe in park, heart rate steady but mind on alert. A small pang of irritation surfaced. Maybe it was a rookie cop-out looking for an easy ticket. Or perhaps it was a routine check. Either way, Marcus had dealt with countless situations more threatening than a traffic stop. He'd keep calm, comply, and surely everything would be resolved without incident. But as the patrol car's door flung open and a figure stormed out with a posture that radiated aggression, a current of unease rippled through Marcus's chest. The flashlight beam cutting across the darkness wavered, revealing the distinct silhouette of a uniformed officer approaching. Marcus cleared his throat, carefully rolling down his window. The approaching footsteps were heavy, almost confrontational. Instinct told him this might not be just another routine stop. A bright flashlight beam slashed through the driver's side window, forcing General Bryant to squint. The officer behind it, a white man with a buzz cut and an angular face set in a scowl, barked an immediate order, hands on the steering wheel. Now. The man wore a standard-issue uniform, the name tag reading Officer Logan. The tension in his stance and voice was palpable. Marcus complied calmly. "My hands are on the wheel, officer," he said in a measured tone. His rank and the weight of his uniform were invisible to the policeman. Here, he was just a silhouette in a tinted SUV. "I pulled you over 'cause you were swerving," Logan stated, though his voice carried an accusatory edge. License and registration, now. Marcus knew he hadn't been swerving, he'd driven steadily the entire way. Still, he moved slowly, mindful of each gesture. "Of course, officer." He explained he was reaching for his wallet in the center console and then, methodically, grabbed his license and registration. Every movement was deliberate, the general in him aware that sudden motions could provoke an already edgy officer. Officer Logan snatched the documents, shining his flashlight at them. He glanced up, suspicion in his eyes, and stepped back, as though expecting trouble. "Marcus Bryant," he read, tone flat. "Address Fort Bragg. Military, huh? That's correct." "I'm an Army officer," Marcus replied, skipping details about rank. He offered a thin smile, hoping courtesy might diffuse tension. "Is there a specific reason I said you were swerving?" Logan repeated curtly. "And your tail light might be out." He circled to the rear of the SUV, shining the flashlight. The light was functional, though slightly dim. "Could be a short. Maybe you're better off checking your vehicle more often," Logan called, voice dripping with condescension. Marcus bit back a response. He'd had the Tahoe serviced last week. Everything was in top shape. This felt more like a fishing expedition than a genuine stop. Still, he tried to remain cordial. "Thank you for pointing that out. I'll have it inspected." Logan returned to the driver's side, still beaming the light into Marcus's face. "Don't move. I'll run your info." He stomped off to his cruiser. Marcus exhaled, a swirl of annoyance and caution swirling in his gut. The stance, the tone, the aggression, it all signaled a deeper hostility than a mere traffic check. He glanced at the darkness around him, the tall pines casting towering silhouettes. Is this about to escalate, he wondered. He had faced threats on foreign soil, but it was an unsettling truth that here on American roads, one rogue officer could pose danger if racial bias underpinned their authority. Sitting in his SUV, Marcus watched the reflection of flashing blue lights in his side mirror. The sky was moonless, the highway deserted, making the scene surreal like a stage set for a tense showdown. He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, willing the situation to remain calm. He'd dealt with high-stress scenarios in combat zones, but this tension felt personal in a way the battlefield rarely did. Officer Logan lingered in his cruiser longer than expected, presumably running the license. Marcus had no criminal record, no unpaid tickets, nothing that should raise alarm. Still, his pulse quickened. He'd heard enough stories, some from close friends, about routine stops that escalated tragically, especially for black men. Eventually, Logan emerged from the patrol car, slamming the door with a hint of aggression. The officer approached again, footsteps heavier this time. Before Marcus could greet him, Logan snapped, "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus inhaled slowly. Why? He wanted to ask, but instinct told him not to challenge. He unfastened his seatbelt and opened the door. The moment his feet hit the asphalt, Logan's flashlight came up to his chest. "Hands where I can see them," the officer barked. Marcus raised his hands slightly away from his sides. "Is there a problem, officer?" "You're acting suspicious," Logan muttered, eyes flicking down to the neat collared shirt Marcus wore, then to the slacks, ignoring any sign that this was a soldier on his own country's soil. "License says you're Army. Got any weapons in the car?" "No, I don't." Marcus kept his voice even, though he felt an ember of indignation burn. "I'm on my way home from Fort Bragg. No weapons, no contraband. You won't find anything wrong." But Logan's expression was that of a predator who believed he'd found prey. "I'll decide that," he advanced, body angled as if ready to pounce. "Turn around. Put your hands on the hood." The command echoed in the hush of the pines. Marcus complied, the metal of the hood cool under his palms. As Logan patted him down, an undeniable sense of invasion prickled across Marcus's skin. This was more than procedure. It was a search for a reason, to confirm bias. Marcus steadied his breath, reminding himself that any show of frustration might be twisted as resistance. The pat-down ended with Logan finding nothing. Marcus heard an annoyed grunt. "We'll search your vehicle," the officer declared. "Something's off about you." Marcus frowned, turning slightly. "Officer, do you have probable cause?" But the question only seemed to inflame Logan further. "I'm giving you an order," he retorted, voice rising. "Don't get smart with me, or I'll have you in cuffs for obstruction. Now, step back." Marcus swallowed a surge of anger. This is insane, he thought. He carefully stepped away, conscious of every movement. But the night's stillness felt charged, a crackling fuse waiting for a spark. And somewhere, deep in his gut, Marcus sensed that everything was about to go from bad to worse. Logan circled around the Tahoe, glowering at Marcus as if daring him to protest. The officer's posture betrayed a man who relished authority. He swung open the passenger door, rummaging through the glove compartment and center console. Finding only standard documents, a Fort Bragg parking pass, some receipts, and a first aid kit, he slammed the compartment shut. The moment brimmed with tension. As if unsatisfied, Logan yanked open the back door. Marcus watched from a few paces away, his heart pounding. "This is unconstitutional," he wanted to declare, but he had to tread cautiously. He'd seen how swiftly a situation could spiral once a cop felt threatened. Then, from the corner of his eye, Marcus noticed headlights approaching another vehicle on the lonely highway. It slowed, the driver perhaps curious about the police presence. This seemed to irritate Logan, who glanced at the passing car, and then back at Marcus with mounting hostility. Without warning, Logan turned, his hand darting to his holster. Click! In a single fluid motion, the officer drew his firearm, leveling it at Marcus's chest. "Down on your KNEs. Now!" Logan shouted, voice quivering with a mix of adrenaline and aggression. Marcus froze, mind racing. He'd faced enemy guns in war zones, but never had an American police officer pointed a weapon at him like this. Instinct screamed that any sudden move could be fatal. He slowly raised both hands in surrender. "Officer, calm down," he said, with deliberate steadiness, his military training reigning in panic. I'm not resisting. You shut up, Logan bellowed, stepping closer, finger hovering near the trigger. You think you can lie to me about who you are? Army, my ass. You look like a criminal to me. You make one wrong move and you're done. Marcus's stomach twisted. The muzzle of the gun loomed, the metal glint reflecting the swirling lights. He considered identifying himself as a high-ranking general. Would that help or inflame the situation? From the intensity in Logan's eyes, the officer might disregard any claim that contradicted his prejudice. A second car slowed on the opposite side of the road, its driver evidently alarmed by the scene of a cop with a drawn gun. The observer might have been calling 911 or filming from a phone. Marcus had no clue if that help or hinder him. He only knew he was in a lethal standoff with a trigger-happy policeman. "All right," Marcus said quietly, carefully lowering himself to his knees on the gravel. One knee at a time, he placed his hands on his head, adopting the posture of utter compliance. "I'm cooperating, officer. Please, let's not escalate." Logan's chest heaved, sweat beading along his temple. Something in the cop's face, an unhinged flicker, suggested he believed he was in the right. Marcus prayed silently that reason would prevail before a bullet ended it all. Kneeling on the rocky roadside, Marcus felt the grit press into his slacks. His hands remained interlaced behind his head, his posture as non-threatening as possible. Officer Logan kept the gun raised, his breathing audible over the hum of the patrol car's engine. Suddenly, another set of headlights flared behind the police cruiser. A second law enforcement vehicle screeched to a halt, its markings indicating military police from Fort Bragg. The door swung open, revealing a petite MP sergeant, Ebony Delgado. She'd been patrolling near the base perimeter when she got a report from a passing driver about an armed standoff on the highway. Within moments, Delgado recognized the black SUV from the base and its occupant. "What the?" Delgado exclaimed, rushing forward with her sidearm holstered. She immediately noted the gun in Logan's hand, aimed at a kneeling Marcus. Panic flared in her eyes. "General Bryant!" Hearing her shout, Officer Logan spun around, startled. His aim wavered. Delgado, a professional to the core, raised her palms in a non-threatening gesture, stepping slowly between Logan and Marcus. "Sir, put the weapon down. He is a high-ranking officer from Fort Bragg." Logan's face twisted in confusion, the tension in his grip intensifying. "What are you talking about?" "He said he was Army, but I can confirm that's General Marcus Bryant," Delgado insisted, inching closer. "You're making a huge mistake." Delgado's voice quivered with urgency. She knew if Logan fired now, not only would it be a catastrophic injustice, it would ignite a scandal that could shatter the fragile trust between local law enforcement and the military community. Behind them, the spectator in the passing car had parked at a safe distance and was filming the entire spectacle on a smartphone. The glare of phone light reflected off the police cruiser's paint, capturing every moment for potential viral consumption. Logan's brow furrowed, the lines of disbelief warring with the sudden knowledge he might be pointing a gun at a legitimate general. He glanced at Marcus, still on his knees, wearing an expression that mixed frustration and caution. Delgado took another step. "Officer, he's no threat. Lower the weapon before this spirals out of control." For a tense moment, the fate of 2 careers and possibly a life hung in the air. Logan's finger hovered near the trigger. The adrenaline in his veins likely screamed to maintain dominance. But confronted by a fellow officer, especially military police who recognized the general, doubt flickered across his face. Slowly, grudgingly, he began to lower his firearm, the barrel tilting toward the ground. Relief washed through Delgado, and she motioned for Marcus to remain still. This bizarre confrontation wasn't over yet, far from it, but at least the immediate threat of a bullet had receded. With Officer Logan's weapon now down, Sergeant Delgado took swift command of the chaos. She gestured for Marcus to stand. He rose, dusting off his knees, but his posture remained guarded. The tension still crackled in the humid night air. Delgado stepped between them, scanning each face. "General Bryant, are you all right, sir?" she asked, voice trembling slightly with the weight of the situation. Marcus nodded slowly. "I'm fine, Sergeant, a bit rattled, but uninjured." He turned to Logan, who hovered in uncertain silence. "Officer, I hope you realize the seriousness of what just happened. You were moments away from a terrible mistake." His tone was controlled, more disappointed than enraged. Logan's gaze flickered to the Tahoe, then to Delgado. "He wasn't exactly cooperative," he muttered defensively. "I had reason to suspect." "You had no reason," Delgado cut in, her own temper flaring. "That man you nearly shot has served this country for 30 years. He's faced danger in combat zones. You had zero cause to pull a gun." The onlooker with the smartphone edged closer, capturing every heated word. Marcus recognized the shift in dynamic. Not only was Logan's authority challenged, he was also being recorded in a situation where the truth would eventually surface. The public outcry, once this video hit social media, could be monumental. Logan fumbled for an official stance. The car matched a vague description from an earlier alert. He lied. "I was just following protocol." Marcus's eyes flashed with disbelief. "I'd love to see that so-called alert. I know how procedures work. Usually, officers run the plates before escalating." "Did you even bother verifying them?" Delgado folded her arms, her official stance underscoring Marcus's point. "Exactly. And if there was an alert, you should have radioed for backup in a standard approach, not brandish your weapon at a high-ranking official." Logan's face burned, caught between the humiliating truth of his racist assumptions and the presence of the camera. He had no good recourse. He stammered, but the words died in his throat. Marcus inhaled deeply, calming himself with practiced discipline. "Sergeant Delgado, I appreciate you stepping in. Let's wrap this up. If the officer still wants to check anything further, let him do it now. Otherwise, I'd like to be on my way." Delgado nodded. She glared at Logan. "Officer, do you have any legitimate grounds to detain General Bryant further?" Logan hesitated, shame creeping across his features. Then, in a tone barely audible, he mumbled, "No, he can go." Officer Logan holstered his gun, stepping back with the stiffness of a man who'd been publicly unmasked. Marcus exhaled, heart still pounding from the near-catastrophic encounter. His mind buzzed with questions. Should he press charges? File a complaint? He knew that in the swirl of public outrage, the incident might devolve into a sensational scandal, or it might spark a necessary conversation about policing in the region. Sergeant Delgado glared at Logan, then turned to Marcus. "Sir, let me escort you back to the base or wherever you need to go, just to ensure no further incidents." Marcus considered it. Part of him wanted to handle this privately, but in truth, what happened tonight deserved immediate documentation. "Thank you, Sergeant, but I'll drive myself." "I do insist you accompany me to the station, your station or local PD. I want an official record." His voice was even, neither trembling nor raging, but it carried the weight of a man used to having his orders followed. A flicker of relief crossed Delgado's face. "Yes, sir. We can head to the Fort Bragg Provost Marshal's office, or we can do it at the local precinct. Either way, we'll file a formal statement." Before Logan could protest, Delgado pinned him with a hard stare. "Officer, you'll come too. You must be present for the record." Her words weren't a suggestion. The policeman's jaw tightened. He glanced at the smartphone-wielding bystander who was still filming. The last thing Logan likely wanted was official scrutiny, but the situation had spiraled beyond his control. "Fine," he muttered, voice sullen. Marcus strolled back to his SUV. He could almost feel the burn of the camera lens capturing every second of him calmly stepping inside. In one fluid motion, he started the engine, adjusting the seatbelt with forced composure. Delgado hopped into her MP vehicle, flipping on lights to guide them. Logan returned to his own cruiser, though his earlier swagger was gone. The three vehicles pulled onto the highway, forming an unlikely convoy toward the local law enforcement center. As the Tahoe rumbled forward, Marcus stared at the empty back seat, remembering the countless times he'd ferried younger officers to ceremonies or training sessions. He never imagined a moment like this, where a local cop's prejudice nearly triggered a tragedy. Tapping the steering wheel, he wondered if that video footage might become a catalyst for change or just another viral snippet lost in a sea of outrage. The night air was warm and thick with tension as Marcus, Sergeant Delgado, and Officer Logan arrived at the Oakwood County Police Precinct. A small, squat building with harsh fluorescent lighting, it was the closest station to Fort Bragg's outskirts. The digital clock on the dash read nearly 1:00 a.m. Delgado led Marcus inside, her posture alert. Officer Logan trailed behind, shoulders rigid. The desk sergeant on duty, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, blinked in surprise at the unusual gathering. A uniformed MP, a local officer, and a commanding presence whose sharp gaze hinted at authority beyond the typical civilian. "May I help you?" the desk sergeant asked warily. Delgado offered a curt nod. "We need to file an official statement. There was a situation on Route 14 involving Officer Logan and General Marcus Bryant, USARMY. The desk sergeant's eyes widened at the mention of a general. She waved them into a small briefing room. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, bathing the walls in a harsh glare. They seated themselves around a table, Marcus on one side, Logan on the other, Delgado bridging the gap. Marcus recounted the incident with meticulous detail. The desk sergeant typed furiously, her expression shifting from calm to concerned as the narrative unfolded, the questionable stop, the baseless accusations, the drawn gun. Officer Logan tensed visibly each time the story highlighted his aggressive behavior. When Marcus finished, Delgado corroborated key pieces, emphasizing she had found the general kneeling at gunpoint for no apparent reason. "I intervened," Delgado stated, "because lethal force was imminent and it was unwarranted." Then it was Logan's turn. He fiddled with his uniform collar, sweat beading on his forehead. "I believed he was a threat," he insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. He matched a suspicious vehicle description. Words faltered, and the desk sergeant's skeptical gaze told all. Marcus watched the clerk finalize the statement, printing multiple copies. The tension in the room was thick enough to slice. For a moment, Logan seemed to teeter on the verge of an apology, eyes flicking to Marcus with a mix of confusion and shame. Yet pride or fear kept him silent. "You understand," the desk sergeant said to Logan, "this will trigger an internal review. It could lead to disciplinary action, especially with the possibility of video evidence." Logan gulped, nodding stiffly. Marcus remained silent, face stoic. He knew how the chain of command worked. The local PD would investigate, and the outcome might hinge on the public's reaction if the phone footage spread. But for now, the official record was set in motion. Realizing the time, Marcus requested a copy of the incident report, intending to forward it to the JAG office at Fort Bragg. Logan, cornered by the weight of official scrutiny, could only watch as his fate began unspooling in front of him. By the time General Bryant left the precinct, exhaustion weighed on his every step. The adrenaline crash hit, and the night's events swirled in his mind. Sergeant Delgado offered once more to escort him back to base, and this time he accepted. They traveled in subdued silence, the MP cruiser leading the way while Marcus followed in his Tahoe. A sense of relief mingled with indignation. He might be safe now, but the confrontation had opened a Pandora's box of legal and ethical fallout. The next morning, the early rays of sun found Marcus in his office at Fort Bragg. He had hardly slept. A sense of duty propelled him to make immediate contact with the base's public affairs office and the Judge Advocate General Jagcour. He dictated a thorough account of the incident, turned over the precinct's report, and provided contact information for the desk sergeant who took his statement. In a short while, news started trickling among the top brass. Colonel Simmons, a longtime friend and subordinate, stormed into Marcus's office, face etched with concern. "General, we just got wind of what happened last night. Are you okay? They said some local cop pulled a gun on you?" Marcus nodded, gesturing for Simmons to sit. "It was intense, but I'm fine physically. Just wrestling with the implications." Simmons exhaled sharply, tapping a pen on the desk. "This is insane. Everyone at Fort Bragg knows your contribution, your record. If it can happen to you, of all people, imagine what happens to lower-ranking soldiers on their off hours." His tone carried anger and worry. They both knew that many younger servicemen, especially those of color, might be vulnerable to unfair scrutiny. As they spoke, a media alert buzzed on Marcus's phone. A local news station ran a short clip of a shaky cell phone video the moment Officer Logan pointed his weapon at Marcus, accompanied by the bystanders' frantic narration. The anchor's voiceover teased a deeper story to come. "We're investigating a tense confrontation involving a soldier from Fort Bragg and a local police officer," it said. Marcus scrolled anxiously, noting that the clip had garnered thousands of views and comments in just hours. Colonel Simmons leaned over, brow furrowed. "This is going to blow up, sir. The base can't ignore it. Command might want you to address it publicly." The general set his phone aside, pressing fingers to his temples. A swirl of public scrutiny was the last thing he wanted, but he sensed it was inevitable. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every soldier wearing the uniform, about forging real accountability if local officers abused power. Summoning his resolve, he squared his shoulders. If the army's going to stand for justice abroad, we damn well need to ensure it stands for justice at home, too. Within 24 hours, the video of the roadside confrontation catapulted into viral territory, igniting a heated online debate. Local news outlets hounded Fort Bragg's public affairs office for statements, while national media, CNN, MSNBC, also began picking up threads of the story. Social media overflowed with hashtags like #JusticeForGeneralBryant and #racial profiling. Opinion pieces dissected the incident, pointing out the bitter irony that a decorated black general, pledged to protect his country, faced life-threatening bias from those meant to uphold law and order. Fort Bragg's leadership tried to remain circumspect. A short press release acknowledged that an incident involving General Marcus Bryant and a local law enforcement officer has been reported and is under investigation. This typically subdued approach, intended to maintain decorum, only stoked further speculation. Meanwhile, Marcus found himself thrust into the spotlight he never sought. Requests for interviews bombarded his email. Soldiers passing him in the hall offered respectful nods or concerned glances. Some, especially young black servicemen, approached him after training sessions, eyes shining with gratitude. "Sir, this means a lot to us that you're standing up," said Private Wright, a 19-year-old. His voice trembled with sincerity. "We've all heard about stuff like this, but seeing it happen to you, it hits hard." Marcus recognized the burden of representation. He wanted to be careful not to vilify all law enforcement. He had served alongside many brave MP officers and local cops who risked their lives daily. Yet the raw nature of his own ordeal underscored a harsh truth. Prejudice could lurk behind any badge. At the Oakwood County Police Department, Officer Logan faced an onslaught of internal reviews. Fellow officers distanced themselves. A rumor circulated that Logan had a past riddled with minor complaints, never escalated beyond departmental slaps on the wrist until now. The video evidence left no room for ambiguity. Calls for Logan's suspension or termination mounted, adding fuel to the fire. As the scrutiny deepened, so did Marcus's conviction that simply ignoring the event wasn't an option. Each passing hour reaffirmed that the confrontation wasn't just a personal affront. It was a flashpoint in the larger conversation about race, respect, and the uniform, both a soldier's uniform and a police officer's. The tension coiled, awaiting a catalyst that would determine whether this uproar culminated in meaningful change or a fleeting social media storm. By the week's end, the mounting pressure was impossible to ignore. Fort Bragg's commanding general, Lieutenant General Alicia Barrington, decided it was time for a public address. She called a press conference at the base's main auditorium, inviting media outlets and local community leaders to attend. The plan was twofold: reassure the public of the Army's stance against injustice, and reaffirm cooperation with local law enforcement's investigation. General Marcus Bryant stood backstage, uniform crisp, medals gleaming. He exchanged a tense glance with Colonel Simmons. "I never imagined I'd be here in front of cameras, not for achievements or tragedies overseas, but for something like this," Marcus murmured. Simmons patted his shoulder. "It's bigger than you now, sir. Let's hope this fosters real change." When Lieutenant General Barrington stepped to the podium, camera shutters clicked. News anchors whispered updates into microphones. She delivered a concise statement. Fort Bragg supports the thorough investigation into the confrontation between General Bryant and Officer Logan. We trust due process will reveal the truth. We remain steadfast in our commitment to the safety and dignity of every soldier under our watch, and to every citizen we serve alongside. Then came the moment many awaited. Marcus Bryant's turn to speak. He approached the lectern, the hush in the room thick with anticipation. Staring out at the sea of cameras and anxious faces, he inhaled deeply. "Good afternoon," he began, voice steady. "I stand before you not as a victim, but as a soldier dedicated to this country's principles. During my years of service, I've believed in protecting freedoms both abroad and here at home. Yet, a recent incident reminded me that not everyone is extended that freedom equally." He paused, letting the gravity settle. "I respect law enforcement. Many officers do heroic work daily. But we must acknowledge that prejudice can seep into any institution. My encounter was a stark example. Reporters jotted notes feverishly. Many cameras zoomed in, capturing the subtle determination etched on Marcus's face. We talk often of bridging divides, building trust, and uniting for our common good. But trust is built on accountability. I've filed my statements, cooperated with investigators, and trust the local PD to do what's right. Meanwhile, I ask the public to remain patient and constructive. Let's transform anger into advocacy, ensuring such episodes become fewer and fewer." A wave of questions erupted. "Do you plan legal action? How do you feel about calls to fire Officer Logan? Did you fear for your life?" Marcus answered carefully, emphasizing due process, referencing the video evidence, and acknowledging his fear, but also his training. He concluded by urging deeper community engagement. As he stepped away from the podium, applause mingled with shouted follow-ups. Lieutenant General Barrington thanked everyone and declared the conference over. The frenzy spilled into the corridors, reporters chasing final quotes, the swirl of flashbulbs and raised voices echoing. Marcus retreated, relieved the gauntlet had ended, yet aware the real battle for accountability was still unfolding behind closed doors in the local PD's corridors. Officer Logan sat in a cramped interview room within the Oakwood County Police Department's administrative wing. Harsh light from a single overhead lamp illuminated his tired features. Across from him sat Chief Superintendent Irene Carver, a woman known for her unflinching approach to discipline. She flipped through a file containing Logan's record, a record now overshadowed by the high-profile fiasco swirling outside. Carver fixed Logan with a steely gaze. The public's outraged. The Army's outraged. Our own officers are furious that you dragged our department's reputation through the mud. I want your side of the story, start to finish. Logan swallowed hard. He recounted the night, but even to his own ears, his justifications sounded flimsy. He stammered about suspicious behavior, about feeling threatened. Each phrase seemed to wilt under Carver's unwavering stare. "Spare me," Carver said curtly, snapping the file shut. "We've all seen the video. You approached with hostility, escalated needlessly, and brandished your weapon against a man who was cooperating and who outranks you in ways you couldn't fathom. Now, the city's mayor is calling for your immediate suspension, perhaps even termination." Logan's mouth went dry. "Chief, if you suspend me, that's my career, my livelihood. I've served this department for years. Sure, maybe I overreacted, but overreacted. The news is labeling it racial profiling at best, attempted brutality at worst." Carver hissed. She tossed a few photographs onto the table, stills from the phone video, Logan's drawn gun, Marcus kneeling. "Public sentiment is stacked against us. Even the police union is reluctant to support you. We can't risk further damage." Logan's face reddened. He wanted to protest that he was being scapegoated, that it wasn't about race. But deep down, he remembered the rush of adrenaline, the arrogant assumption about Marcus's identity. The footage, the hush of the night, the fear in that man's eyes. Carver stood, smoothing her uniform. "We're putting you on unpaid leave, pending an official disciplinary hearing. Turn in your badge and sidearm, effective immediately." A wave of anger and despair rolled through Logan, but he could see no escape. With a trembling hand, he removed the badge from his belt, placing it on the desk. The cold metal glinted under the fluorescent light, a silent testament to a responsibility he'd betrayed. Carver gathered her notes. "The city will decide your fate, Officer Logan. And if the DAR finds grounds to press charges for civil rights violations, you'll be dealing with more than just a lost job." Logan stared at the floor, the reality sinking in. Outside the interview room, the hum of outraged voices hinted at the onslaught to come. Oakwood County, typically a quiet region near Fort Bragg, ignited with activism. Community leaders, veterans groups, and local organizations held rallies and town halls to address the simmering issue of racial profiling. The footage of a policeman pointing a gun at a revered general had rattled many residents out of complacency. One balmy afternoon, a crowd gathered at Memorial Park near the county courthouse. Hand-lettered signs read "Justice for General Bryant," "End racism in policing," and "Respect those who serve." Families, older citizens, high school students, and off-duty soldiers stood side by side, chanting slogans for accountability. The smell of grilled hot dogs from a nearby food truck wafted through the air, adding an oddly festive note to the tense demonstration. In a corner of the park, Jaden Pierce, a local youth pastor, read from a microphone, "We demand that Officer Logan face the consequences of his actions. Let this be a turning point where Oakwood sets an example. We will not tolerate any officer abusing their power or discriminating based on race." Applause erupted, accompanied by cheers. Some eyes turned to a small knot of law enforcement officers who'd stationed themselves discreetly along the park's perimeter. Tensions were high, some feared a clash, but so far the gathering remained peaceful. Suddenly, a hush passed over the crowd as a new arrival stepped onto the makeshift stage, Colonel Simmons from Fort Bragg. He wore civilian clothes, but carried the gravitas of his uniform. in his posture. "I come in solidarity with our community," he addressed the crowd. "General Bryant is an exceptional leader who's earned the utmost respect. What happened to him shouldn't happen to any citizen, soldier or not." The demonstration roared with approval. "We want to see thorough reforms to ensure that those who protect and serve do so with fairness and without prejudice." Across the park, a local news crew filmed every word, broadcasting it live. People across Oakwood County watched from living rooms and coffee shops, many shaking their heads in agreement. Some, however, grumbled that the protest painted all cops as villains. Online forums buzzed with debate. "We need better training. What about the criminals who resist arrest? Is this overblown just because the victim's a general?" Amid the swirl of opinions, a growing consensus emerged. Oakwood must address policing culture head-on. Meanwhile, the army stood by General Bryant, reinforcing the principle that service to one's country should never be overshadowed by the color of one's skin. Fort Bragg's corridors buzzed with gossip and moral questions. Some soldiers expressed righteous indignation, especially those who'd personally witnessed prejudice in their civilian lives. Others worried about potential backlash against local police partnerships that the base relied on for community programs, training exercises, and security collaborations. Within the base's leadership circle, tension spiked. Lieutenant General Barrington called a closed-door meeting with senior officers, including General Bryant. They convened in a large conference room, tall windows overlooking a parade field where morning drills took place under the southern sun. Barrington opened the session, voice measured. "We're facing a sensitive situation that extends beyond General Bryant's personal ordeal. Our soldiers' trust in local law enforcement is at stake. We must handle this carefully to maintain discipline and good relations." She turned her gaze to Marcus. "General, you have every right to pursue any legal or public route you deem fit, but we must be mindful of the base's broader impact." Marcus nodded. "I understand, MAAM. I'll continue cooperating with the DA's investigation. I won't do anything to tarnish Fort Bragg's reputation. But I can't stand by quietly if justice isn't served." A colonel from the Civil Affairs Department chimed in. "Our local outreach programs with the Oakwood PD are on hold. They're uncertain how to proceed. We risk losing progress we've made if the public sees us as endorsing or ignoring this fiasco." Another officer, a brigadier general, added, "We also have to consider troop morale. Soldiers who see their senior officer nearly shot for no reason might question if the army can protect their rights off base." A heavy silence followed. Barrington sighed, leaning forward. "The DA's office has requested your official statement, General Bryant, which I know you provided. They're building a civil rights case. If it moves forward, it will get more media attention, likely a trial. This is uncharted territory, a general testifying against a local cop in a possibly sensational trial." Marcus steepled his fingers, the gravity of it all pressing on him. He recalled the feeling of that gun muzzle pointed at his chest, the helpless fury. "If it prevents this from happening to any other soldier or any citizen, then it's necessary," he said. "I'll do what's required." Barrington nodded in agreement. "We stand behind you, but do be prepared for the scrutiny, both personal and professional. This might not be a short fight." As they concluded, the officers dispersed, each grappling with a mixture of loyalty, frustration, and a sense that the lines between their structured military world and the unpredictable civilian domain had blurred dangerously. Marcus lingered, gazing out the window at the neat lines of recruits marching. He'd always believed the army was a shield for freedom, but now found himself in a position to champion justice on home soil wishing. It wasn't so necessary, but determined to see it through. 2 weeks later, Oakwood's district attorney, Lydia Morales, announced she had enough evidence to charge Officer Logan with felony assault and official misconduct. The press conference was brief, but the fallout was swift. City officials voiced support for the move, while the police union signaled reluctance to defend Logan. Communities of color breathed a cautious sigh of relief. Accountability, for once, seemed within reach. In the midst of preparations for the case, General Bryant received a subpoena to testify. The trial was scheduled to begin in a month, giving the DA's office time to finalize statements and gather witness testimony. Sergeant Delgado, who had intervened that night, was also slated to testify, as were the bystanders with video footage. Meanwhile, Officer Logan experienced a spiraling downfall. Suspended without pay, ostracized by colleagues, and bombarded with hate mail, he barricaded himself in a small apartment near downtown Oakwood. His attorney, an overworked public defender, managed to arrange a quick meeting. "Sam, we need a strategy," the lawyer said, rummaging through notes. "The prosecution's evidence is strong. They have a phone video, eyewitness accounts." Logan glowered, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. "It's not fair. I was just doing my job." That general escalated. His lawyer raised a palm. "Stop. We both know that's not going to hold up in front of a jury. If you keep lying, we'll never get a plea deal. If you show remorse and own up, maybe we can reduce the charges." Logan sank into a worn armchair, the weight of realization bearing down. Remorse. The word stung. He replayed that night again in his mind, the moment he drew his gun, the terror in Bryant's eyes. Was it fear or fury he'd seen? Maybe both. He swallowed. "I might have overreacted," he murmured haltingly. The lawyer seized that glimmer. "Exactly. We could argue you had a lapse in judgment. Stress, exhaustion, fear, whatever angle." He paused, meeting Logan's gaze. "But you have to come clean." No more spin. A knot formed in Logan's stomach. Admitting wrongdoing felt like stepping off a cliff, yet the alternative, facing a jury unconvinced of his narrative, would almost certainly lead to conviction. "All right," he whispered, voice cracking. "I'll do it. I'll accept responsibility if that's the only shot I have left." Outside the apartment window, a city unsettled by the near-fatal incident continued to bustle. Logan realized with a shiver that the trial and his confession would become a national talking point. He once believed wearing a badge inherently made him a hero. Now, he confronted the painful truth that authority can become a weapon when wielded by the prejudiced and unaccountable. The day of the trial arrived, and Oakwood County Courthouse buzzed like a beehive. A throng of onlookers, supporters, and media had gathered. Camera crews loitered on the steps, capturing every arrival. Inside, the airy hallways echoed with footsteps and hushed murmurs. The tension was tangible. General Marcus Bryant, flanked by Colonel Simmons and a military legal advisor, entered the courthouse in uniform. The sight of his ribbons and stars drew respectful nods. A few reporters shouted questions, but he politely declined, focusing on the proceedings to come. Officer Logan, clad in a simple suit, instead of the uniform he'd been stripped of, arrived separately with his public defender. He wore a haunted expression, pale and somber. Security guided him through the swirling crowd. A ring of local law enforcement officers stood by, ensuring no chaos erupted. In the packed courtroom, District Attorney Morales methodically presented the state's case. She described how Logan pulled over General Bryant without valid cause, escalated the situation, and resorted to lethal force without justification. Morales played the phone video, the footage capturing Logan's drawn gun, the profane commands, Marcus kneeling. A hush fell at the stark reality. A few spectators gasped. Then came eyewitness testimonies, the bystander who filmed, Sergeant Delgado, recounting her arrival. Delgado's voice trembled with anger as she described the moment she found the general at gunpoint. "I'm convinced a shot would have been fired if I hadn't stepped in," she concluded, tears glistening. Marcus took the stand next, uniform crisp, posture erect. He detailed the events calmly, answering the DA's questions with clarity. The defense cross-examined, but found no foothold. Marcus's credibility was unassailable, and he had no contradictory details to trip him up. Finally, Logan himself was called to testify. He hesitated under oath, eyes flicking to the glowering jury. With prompting from his lawyer, he admitted to overreacting and misreading the situation. "I was on edge. I let my biases cloud my judgment," he said, voice trembling with regret. "I'm sorry, truly sorry. I never intended to harm anyone." A tear rolled down his cheek, a moment that might have resonated with compassion if not for the raw video evidence that overshadowed any claim of ignorance. Closing arguments hammered home the point. The uniform does not grant unrestrained power, and accountability must apply to all. The defense leaned on Logan's confession, urging mercy from the jury. The prosecution insisted on a strong message that an unprovoked near shooting demanded real consequences. The judge recessed, giving the jury time to deliberate. Outside the courthouse, the crowd waited with bated breath for a verdict that could set a precedent and, perhaps, restore faith in a justice system that often seemed precariously poised between fairness and failure. After hours of deliberation, the jury reconvened, a hush spreading through the courtroom as they returned to their seats. Officer Logan, head bowed, hands clenched, stood with his attorney. General Bryant sat among the spectators, Colonel Simmons by his side, both men stoic but keyed up with anticipation. The court clerk rose, reading the verdict. On the count of felony assault, we find the defendant, Samuel Logan, guilty. On the count of official misconduct, guilty. The air rippled with a collective gasp. A wave of relief, sorrow, and vindication passed among the crowd. The judge thanked the jury and announced sentencing would occur in a week's time. Logan's shoulders slumped. Tears trickled down his cheeks as the gavel struck finality. Though the maximum sentence could be significant, many predicted a more measured punishment, possibly 5 to 10 years, with parole eligibility. Regardless, the conviction sealed a chapter in Oakwood's policing history. In the corridor afterwards, local media swarmed for reactions. Colonel Simmons escorted General Bryant through the throng. Marcus paused briefly to offer a measured statement. "Today's verdict shows that accountability can prevail. I hope we all learn something from this about how quickly bias can turn deadly and the need for trust between citizens and officers." He declined to comment further. As the courthouse emptied, supporters approached Marcus, offering handshakes and grateful words. A cluster of uniformed army personnel stood off to the side, nodding their respect. Some shared whispered prayers. The tension that had gripped Oakwood for weeks began to ease, though the journey ahead rebuilding trust, addressing deeper prejudices, remained steep. That evening, Marcus drove back to Fort Bragg in the same black Tahoe that had triggered everything. His chest felt lighter, but also carried a solemn weight. A single verdict wouldn't fix a systemic issue, but it was a start. He allowed himself a private moment of reflection, if not for Delgado, or that bystander with the phone. I might not be alive. The thought stung, reminding him that justice often hinged on fleeting chance. At the base gates, the young MP saluted him with extra vigor, a subtle show of solidarity. Marcus returned the salute, forging onward to his office. Life as a general continued briefings, strategy sessions, and soldier welfare tasks. But beyond his official duties, he carried a new mission: to champion the cause of equality and ensure no future soldier or any citizen would have to kneel at gunpoint for a routine stop gone awry. General Marcus Bryant's near-fatal encounter with Officer Logan underscores the sobering truth that prejudice can lurk in the very systems meant to keep us safe. Yet, in the face of anger and fear, justice was served through unwavering courage, public outcry, and a commitment to accountability, proving that real change is possible when communities refuse to stay silent. Even as one verdict cannot heal all wounds, it shines a beacon of hope. Honor and respect must extend beyond uniforms, badges, and rank, reaching the heart of every human interaction. If this dramatic tale resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support amplifies these stories that champion empathy, highlight systemic challenges, and spark meaningful dialogue. Help us spread a message of unity and accountability, because only together can we forge a future where every individual's dignity is upheld, no matter their background. Thank you for watching,